my channel, speaking about everything that people bring towards me, about relationships, about Ayurveda, yoga, and then also shedding a light on their personal struggles, questions, and solutions through the lens of this ancient old wisdom. So today I'd like to speak about non-attachment, something that people come to me with a question of, is this now really my partner being non-attached or is he avoidant? So I just like to dive deeper with you, so please stay here and listen carefully. Between responsibility and avoidance and the courage to stay. Today's reflection begins with a paradox. Few ideas have traveled as widely through modern spiritual culture as the concept of non-attachment, and yet few have been so thoroughly misunderstood in my eyes. In contemporary wellness language, non-attachment is often described as a state of emotional lightness, meaning minimal investment and effortless letting go. People claim they are not attached to outcomes, partners, or material things, while simultaneously drifting through a landscape of half-finished conversations, short-lived intimacies, and an endless search for novelty. What appears as spiritual maturity sometimes resembles something far more familiar in psychology: avoidance disguised as wisdom. The intention here is not to mock spiritual practice or philosophical inquiry, because this is clearly my field where I have been teaching and treating in the last 50 years. On the contrary, the goal is to restore depth to a concept that originally demanded discipline, ethical responsibility, and a remarkable degree of self-honesty. When non-attachment becomes a slogan rather than a practice, it risks turning into a permission slip for self-indulgence in my eyes. Instead of cultivating freedom from manipulation and egoic control, it may reinforce a subtle attachment to comfort, stimulation, and the illusion that one can move endlessly without consequence. The new absurdity: non-attachment as emotional minimalism. A striking feature on contemporary discourse is the tendency to equate non-attachment with emotional distance. People speak of being unattached to relationships while maintaining a pattern of frequent flirtation, serial intimacy, or abrupt withdrawal when conversations become difficult. There is often a fascination with obscure gurus, inspirational quotes on Instagram or somewhere, or simplified interpretations of ancient texts, yet little willingness to confront the discomfort of sustained commitment. Psychologically, this pattern resembles avoidant relational strategies. Emotional closeness requires negotiation, compromise, and sometimes painful honesty for both involved. The idea that one should remain unattached can become a shield against accountability and vulnerability. When conflict arises, it is easier to invoke impermanence than to remain present with another human being's disappointment or grief. The language of spirituality becomes a form of insulation, emotional insulation. Imagine someone proudly declaring that they are unattached to material possessions while anxiously refreshing online platforms for the next exciting purchase of a yoga class or anything. Or a person who claims to transcend romantic attachment but becomes restless whenever attention shifts away from them. In such cases, non-attachment is less about freedom and more about maintaining control over one's own comfort zone. The individual is not free from attachment. They are in fact deeply attached to their own self-indulgence. A more psychological grounded understanding suggests that genuine non-attachment is not a withdrawal from feeling, but a refusal to manipulate circumstances in order to avoid feeling. Commitment then becomes an active position rather than a limitation. Choosing to stay, to listen, or to repair a relationship is not a sign of attachment, but an expression of ethical agency. It creates the safety necessary for healing and growth, both individually and collectively. Commitment as a form of non-attachment. This may sound counterintuitive. How can commitment coexist with non-attachment? The answer lies in the difference between holding on to someone and showing up for them. Attachment, in its problematic form, attempts to possess or control. Commitment, by contrast, acknowledges uncertainty while choosing responsibility. One may decide to remain in a partnership not because it guarantees constant pleasure, but because it represents a conscious agreement to share vulnerability and accountability besides joy and love. In psychological terms, commitment stabilizes the relational environment. It allows individuals to encounter their own moods, impulses, and fears without acting on every fluctuation of the mind. The idea that one must leave whenever the grass looks greener reflects an attachment to sensory novelty rather than the freedom of it. Non-attachment, understood in a mature sense, means recognizing these impulses without letting them dictate every decision. An observation is that many people wish to be free from attachment while remaining deeply attached to the idea of endless options. Modern culture celebrates flexibility, mobility, and perpetual reinvention, yet the nervous system often requires continuity in order to feel safe. When commitment is framed as a loss of freedom, individuals may overlook the deeper freedom that emerges from stability and trust. Duty and discernment and the Bhagavad Gita. Turning to classical Indian philosophy, the Bhagavad Gita offers a nuanced perspective on non-attachment to the concept of duty or dharma. The dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna unfolds on a battlefield, a setting that hardly resembles the tranquil imaginary of modern spiritual marketing. Arjuna is overwhelmed by emotional conflict, yet the response he receives is not an invitation to withdraw from action. Instead, he is encouraged to act with clarity, aligning his choices with ethical responsibility rather than personal comfort. Non-attachment in this context does not mean avoiding relationships or consequences. It refers to relinquishing the illusion that one controls outcomes. The emphasis is on right action rather than passive acceptance. Duty is not blind obedience, but disciplined engagement with reality. A person may deeply care for others, while recognizing that their reactions, choices, and feelings cannot be controlled. An important aspect of this teaching involves discernment. Compassion does not require preserving situations that cause harm or stagnation. A metaphor of the rotten fruit is instructive. Nurturing what is irreparably damaged may allow decay to spread. Non-attachment here becomes a form of ethical clarity. It permits one to release what undermines collective well-being without succumbing to bitterness or resentment. This perspective challenges the New Age tendency to interpret non-attachment as perpetual tolerance or emotional neutrality. The Gita's vision is far more demanding. It calls for courage, responsibility, and the willingness to act, even when action brings discomfort. Stoic reflection on emotional discipline. Stoic philosophy offers another lens through which non-attachment can be understood. Thinkers such as Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius emphasize the distinction between what lies within one's control and what does not. The Stoic practitioner cultivates inner stability by focusing on intentions and actions rather than external approval or outcomes. Contrary to popular stereotypes, Stoicism does not advocate emotional suppression. Marcus Aurelius writes extensively about kindness, about cooperation, and social responsibility. Stoic non-attachment aims to prevent emotional reactions from becoming tyrannical. One may love deeply while accepting that loss is inevitable. This acceptance does not diminish the relationship. It enriches it by removing the illusion of permanence. From a psychological standpoint, Stoicism resembles cognitive reframing. Instead of reacting impulsively to every sensation or mood, individuals learn to observe their thoughts and choose responses aligned with values. This approach resonates with the idea of commitment as an active decision rather than a passive state. Non-attachment becomes a form of self-mastery that allows relationships to flourish without manipulation. That means total acceptance. Other philosophical perspectives worth exploring are beyond Stoicism and the Gita. Several traditions offer valuable insights into non-attachment. Early Buddhist thought attributes to Gautama Buddha distinguishes between craving and compassion. Craving involves clinging to experiences in an attempt to make them permanent, while compassion invites deep engagement with others' suffering. Non-attachment here is not emotional indifference, but freedom from compulsive grasping. Taoist philosophy introduces another dimension. Texts such as the Tao Te Ching describe a form of effortless action that arises from alignment with natural processes. Non-attachment is expressed through humility and simplicity rather than through withdrawal from relationship. The practitioner acts without excessive force, allowing situations to unfold organically while remaining ethically present. Even existential philosophy offers parallels. Thinkers like Kierkegaard and Sartre emphasize responsibility for one's choices in a world without guarantees. Authenticity requires confronting uncertainty rather than escaping into comforting abstractions. In this sense, non-attachment can be interpreted as the courage to act without clinging to fixed identities or expectations. The psychological trap of pseudo-spiritual avoidance. A recurring theme across traditions is the importance of self-examination. When individuals adopt the language of non-attachment without engaging in introspection, they risk reinforcing narcissistic tendencies. The desire to remain emotionally unencumbered may mask a fear of vulnerability. Relationships become stages for self-validation rather than arenas for genuine encounter. Humor provides a useful lens. Imagine a person who insists on being beyond attachment, yet becomes irritated whenever their partner asks for clarity or accountability. The spiritual vocabulary may sound sophisticated, but the underlying dynamic remains immature. Non-attachment here becomes a strategy for avoiding the discomfort of growth and accountability. In contrast, though, mature non-attachment requires a willingness to face one's own contradictions. It involves acknowledging impulses toward novelty, attention, or escape without allowing them to dictate behavior. Rather than diminishing emotional depth, this process often intensifies it. Individuals learn to remain present, even when conversations become difficult or when relationships reveal uncomfortable truths. Talking on partnership as the deepest encounter. Perhaps the most challenging arena for practicing non-attachment is intimate partnership. Romantic relationships confront individuals with their own fears, expectations, and unresolved patterns. The temptation to retreat into superficial encounters can be strong, especially in a culture that celebrates constant reinvention. Yet partnership offers a unique opportunity to explore non-attachment as ethical presence. To remain in a committed relationship while acknowledging impermanence requires courage. One cannot rely on guarantees or illusions of control. Instead, the focus shifts toward honest communication, shared responsibility, and mutual growth. Non-attachment becomes the capacity to love without possessing, to listen without manipulating, and to stay even when staying demands effort. From a psychological perspective, this approach fosters resilience. Secure relational environments allow individuals to confront deeper aspects of themselves. Avoidance may provide temporary relief, but it often perpetuates loneliness and fragmentation. Commitment, paradoxically, creates the freedom to explore vulnerability without fear of abandonment. Non-attachment as ethical maturity. Across philosophical traditions and psychological frameworks, non-attachment emerges not as a rejection of relationship, but as a refinement of it. The New Age interpretation that equates non-attachment with emotional minimalism overlooks the ethical rigor embedded in classical teachings. Stoic philosophy emphasizes disciplined judgment. The Gita highlights duty and discernment. Buddhist thought distinguishes compassion from craving, and other traditions invite humility and authenticity. When understood deeply, non-attachment becomes an invitation to remain present rather than to withdraw. It challenges individuals to confront their own impulses towards self-indulgence while cultivating commitment as an active choice. The courage to stay, the courage to listen, the courage to engage with the complexity of partnership may be the most demanding form of non-attachment of all. The humor lies not in dismissing spirituality, but in revealing its paradoxes. A person who claims to be unattached may be fiercely attached to comfort, novelty, and self-image. The individual who chooses commitment, by contrast, may embody the very freedom that non-attachment promises. In this light, non-attachment is less than drifting away from life, and more about standing firmly within it, aware of impermanence, grounded in responsibility, and open to the profound encounter that arises when two people dare to remain present with one another. Love, non-attachment, and the discipline of responsible presence. When discussions about non-attachment move into the realm of love and partnership, the conversation often becomes emotionally charged. Many contemporary interpretations frame non-attachment as a kind of romantic minimalism. Care lightly, invest sparingly, and avoid emotional entanglement. Yet within classical philosophical and psychological perspectives, non-attachment does not diminish love, it refines it. Love becomes less about possession and more about responsibility. It is not an escape from feeling, but a conscious restraint that allows feeling to grow and to occur without manipulations or domination. Love in this sense is not a passive emotion, but an active ethical stance. It requires the willingness to remain present when discomfort arises. Responsible presence means noticing impulses to withdraw, retaliate, to seek novelty, and choosing instead to engage with honesty. Non-attachment does not erase desire or affection. It creates space between impulse and action. In that space, individuals gain the freedom to respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. This restraint is not repression but maturation. Sometimes people celebrate freedom from attachment while remaining deeply attached to the idea of effortless love. The expectation that relationships should remain permanently stimulating can become its own form of attachment. When excitement fades or conflict appears, some individuals interpret this as a sign that the relationship itself is flawed. The language of non-attachment then becomes a justification for leaving rather than an invitation to grow. Instead of asking, "What does this moment ask of me?" the question becomes, "Where can I feel better immediately?" Such a pattern reflects attachment to sensation rather than freedom of it. Growth through responsibility and conscious restraint. Responsibility and restraint are often misunderstood as limitations on personal freedom. In reality, they function as stabilizing forces to allow love to deepen. Conscious restraint means recognizing that every mood, attraction, or frustration does not require immediate expression. It involves an awareness that relationships exist within a shared ethical space. Actions have consequences not only for oneself, but also for others who participate in that relational field. In psychological terms, restraint supports the development of reflective capacity. Rather than acting on transient impulses, individuals cultivate the ability to observe internal states without being governed by them. This capacity is closely related to emotional regulation and mature attachment patterns. Responsibility becomes the framework through which growth occurs because it invites individuals to confront their own limitations rather than projecting dissatisfaction onto partners or circumstances. Avoidance, by contrast, often masquerades as independence, where non-attachment is interpreted as the refusal to engage deeply. It can function as a defense against vulnerability. The individual avoids situations in which accountability might arise. Instead of exploring personal contributions to relational conflict, attention shifts outward toward new experiences or alternative partners. The narrative of spiritual freedom conceals an underlying fear of being seen fully. From a therapeutic perspective, this avoidance interrupts growth. Without sustained engagement, individuals miss opportunities to encounter their own patterns reflected through another person. Relationships become transient stages rather than transformative encounters. The absence of responsibility reduces relational depth, leaving individuals in a cycle of repetition rather than evolution. The avoidance trap, non-attachment without self-reflection. When non-attachment is framed primarily as emotional independence, it can foster a subtle disconnection from accountability. The individual may claim to have transcended attachment while remaining deeply invested in self-image. This dynamic can appear in people who identify strongly with spiritual ideals yet struggle to engage in honest dialogue when conflict emerges. The refusal to examine one's own behavior becomes rationalized as detachment from drama. Psychologically spoken, thus such patterns often align with avoidant relational styles. Avoidance reduces immediate discomfort but maintains long-term insecurity. The individual becomes skilled at disengaging before intimacy reaches a depth where genuine transformation might occur. While the language of non-attachment may sound elevated, the underlying motivation is often the preservation of emotional distance. Imagine someone declaring that they have mastered non-attachment while keeping a meticulously curated identity that must have never been challenged. The moment a partner expresses vulnerability or requests clarity, the conversation shifts toward philosophical abstractions. The relationship becomes a lecture rather than a meeting of two imperfect human beings. True non-attachment invites the opposite movement. It encourages individuals to look inward, acknowledging fears, limitations, and unresolved experiences. Accountability becomes an expression of self-respect rather than a burden. The willingness to face oneself within relationships marks a significant shift from avoidance toward maturity. Non-attachment in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. A classical articulation of non-attachment appears in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, where the concept of vairagya is paired with a sustained practice, abhyasa. The text defines non-attachment not as withdrawal from life, but as freedom from craving towards sensory experiences and mental impressions. This freedom arises through disciplined awareness rather than through denial of relationships or responsibility. Patanjali describes non-attachment as the capacity to remain steady regardless of attraction or aversion. Importantly, this steadiness is cultivated through consistent effort. The practitioner learns to observe internal reactions without becoming enslaved by them. Such training does not eliminate emotion. It refines perception. Non-attachment becomes a stabilizing force that allows ethical action to emerge more clearly. Within the framework of the sutras, non-attachment is inseparable from self-study, svadhyaya, and discernment, viveka. The practitioner is encouraged to examine patterns of thought and behavior with honesty. This process aligns closely with psychological introspection. Rather than escaping relational complexity, the individual develops the capacity to remain present within it without being overwhelmed by reactive tendencies. From this perspective, non-attachment supports deeper connection rather than superficial detachment. By reducing the compulsion to control outcomes, individuals become more available to authentic interaction. Relationships are no longer driven by fear or loss, or the need for constant validation. Instead, they become spaces where growth unfolds naturally through shared awareness. Connection as a path of healing. This is my go-to in my practice. If non-attachment is misunderstood as emotional distance, connection becomes the antidote. Connection does not imply fusion or dependency. It represents the capacity to meet another person with openness and curiosity. Many therapeutic traditions emphasize that healing occurs within relationship. The presence of a responsive other provides a mirror through which individuals can recognize patterns that remain invisible in isolation. Healthy connections require safety. A safe relational space allows individuals to express vulnerability without fear to ridicule or abandonment. When relationships are characterized by avoidance or instability, this sense of safety diminishes. Growth becomes constrained because individuals remain guarded. The absence of consistent presence prevents the nervous system from settling into a state where deeper exploration is possibly only. In contrast, committed relationships create an environment where reflection and transformation can occur. Partners witness each other's strengths and limitations, offering feedback that encourages development. This mirroring process can feel uncomfortable, yet it provides valuable opportunities for self-understanding. The willingness to remain engaged despite discomfort distinguishes connection from avoidance. Connection also reflects a fundamental human need. Research in developmental psychology suggests that secure attachment in early life fosters resilience and emotional regulation. When connection is disrupted or experienced as unsafe, individuals may adopt protective strategies that resemble detachment. These strategies can persist into adulthood, shaping relational patterns, Recognizing this history allows individuals to approach non-attachment with compassion rather than judgment. Trauma responses and the illusion of spiritual achievement. The tendency to numb the desire for connection is sometimes interpreted as a sign of spiritual advancement. However, from a psychological perspective, it may represent just a trauma response. Individuals who have experienced inconsistent or unsafe love in childhood may learn to minimize emotional investment as a form of self-protection. While such strategies once served a necessary function, they can limit relational growth when carried into adult partnerships. Distinguishing between ethical non-attachment and trauma-based avoidance is essential. Ethical non-attachment arises from awareness and intentionality. It involves recognizing the impermanence of experiences while remaining engaged with life. Trauma-based avoidance, by contrast, reduces emotional exposure to prevent reactivation of past pain. The outward behavior may appear similar, yet the underlying motivations differ significantly. Healing involves acknowledging the distinction without shame. Individuals may discover that their reluctance to connect deeply is not evidence of spiritual mastery, but a signal that unresolved experiences require attention now. Within safe relationships, these patterns can gradually soften. The presence of a compassionate partner or community provides a corrective emotional experience that challenges assumptions about intimacy, connection, partnership, and the mirror of growth. Partnership offers a unique context in which non-attachment and connection intersect. Within a committed relationship, individuals encounter aspects of themselves that remain hidden in solitude. The partner becomes a mirror, reflecting both strengths and vulnerabilities. This mirroring can feel intense, yet it is precisely this intensity that supports individual growth. Non-attachment within partnership means allowing the other person to exist as they are, rather than attempting to mold them according to one's preferences. It also means accepting that personal transformation cannot be forced. Responsibility shifts from controlling the partner to cultivating one's own integrity. To this process, love evolves from a pursuit of gratification into a practice of presence. Avoidant patterns disrupt this dynamic by removing the mirror. When individuals disengage at the first sign of discomfort, they lose the opportunity to explore deeper layers of themselves. Relationships remain shallow, reinforcing the belief that intimacy is inherently unstable. Over time, this pattern can lead to isolation disguised as independence. Connection, by contrast, invites courage. It asks individuals to remain present even when conversations challenge self-image. The reward is not constant harmony, but a deeper sense of authenticity. Growth becomes a shared journey rather than an individual project. Non-attachment as the art of staying away in love. This is my whole point. You have to listen to that. Love and non-attachment need not stand in opposition. When understood through the lenses of responsibility, restraint, and connection, non-attachment becomes a form of ethical maturity. It encourages individuals to engage fully with relationships while releasing the impulse to control outcomes. Avoidance, on the other hand, represents a distortion of this principle, masking fear with philosophical language. The teaching of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali emphasize disciplined awareness, reminding practitioners that freedom arises through sustained practice and honest self-examination. Psychological insights reinforce the importance of connection as a foundation for healing. Safe relationships provide the mirror through which individuals can recognize and transform their patterns. Ultimately, non-attachment is not about drifting away from love, but about staying awake within it. It asks for conscious restraint rather than emotional numbness, for responsibility rather than self-indulgence. In this way, partnership becomes not a limitation, but a profound opportunity to encounter oneself and another with clarity, self-reflection, humor, and compassion. I hope you liked that episode. Please leave a comment and leave a like and subscribe. And I hope I see you again, and ask questions and tell me your thoughts. And I'm here to answer your questions on relations, on Ayurveda and yoga, and all kinds of related subjects. So have a good day, and I hope this inspirational talk will lead to some clarification in your own life.